Hello, my name is Evan Sinisak. I'm recording this long explanation demo of my game Dungeon Adventure for Fanshawe Game Development Advanced Programming Final Game Jam project. It took 12 attempts and 2 hours to record a 6-minute short demo. So apologies if you don't like the background music. I need something to keep me a little bit focused on this because I intend on going through everything. So the whole thing about this game was that I wanted to do a bunch of graphic effects, but also make an actual game around it. So the way that I decided to handle that was I basically implemented and programmed as much of the game as I could until I got to one of the graphics effects that I wanted to implement, and then I implemented the graphic effects. For example, there wasn't much point in implementing the footprint decals if I didn't have enemies to leave footprint decals. So I needed to make enemies that would do that. So it all started with basically taking the old graphics project exam where we loaded the dungeon TSV file that you generated using your student ID, and basically reading this file determined where the doors, where the floors, where everything else was. So I started with that, and then remembered there were a lot of issues running that program. I'm going to switch to some different models, because those were... It's not necessary that those models were super high quality, but they were huge. I remember having to scale them down by like at least 100 to get them to a reasonable size to work with. So I have a bunch of models from this dark fantasy kit made by Runemark Studios that has a bunch of floors and walls and furniture and stuff like that. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna make the dungeon out of that. One of the things I'm gonna need to do is level of detail, but after I switched the models, I realized that part of the issue with that old program was the models. They were such high quality models that simply because of how many we had to draw, it was slowing most of our systems down. But with the models I was using from the Dark Fantasy kit, even though I had the same number of models to draw the entire dungeon, my computer was running fine. It ran the program fine. There was no slowdown. So I thought, okay, well, I guess that's not something I'm going to really need to do for the level of detail. I'll have to do something else when I implement the enemies and stuff. So I go through all that. I end up making other CPP files just to keep the main a bit cleaner and a bit more organized. So the main load has my load world file, which is how I make that the observation room. Load lights file, which loads all the lights in the scene. With one slight change, I decided to... First I tried to make a light on every door. Apparently there's a lot of doors in my dungeon, so there were too many lights. I was running out of lights on my shaders and trying to make I think I have 100 lights on my shaders. Yeah, I have 100 lights. I have up to 100 lights. Which is a lot of uniforms. But, and I needed more than that. So I tried increasing the number of lights. OpenGL did not like that. I kept getting errors that my shaders were basically trying to require too much space. So I said, okay, can't do lights to doors. So let me just go through my entire dungeon, figure out where I want each of these lights, and I will just, after I load it, if the light is a point light, then I will make this torch entity. And basically the torch entity handles the flickering attenuation stuff. Load models. Just kept these because might need to go back to them for some reason. Or at the very least, it was nice to have the names. Loading a lot of models for this. A lot of models. And then load textures. I decided to make it a function instead of just doing it in main again, just to clean it up. So I basically say I make loaded all true, and then I do an and equal at each create, and as long as it returns true, then this will be true at the end. And if it's not true, then I have to go through and figure out which one didn't work. So load all the textures in the texture folder, and then open the DFK textures folder and load all the DFK textures. And then load default skybox. I just make the 4 cubes for Tropical Sunny Day, Space, City, and Skyrim. Though I only use the first 2. And then I implemented Fmod to have footstep sound effects as the player moves around the scene. So I just went back to my old media fundamentals stuff and load up the sounds. Make main functions, again, just trying to clean up main a little bit. I do not use the make FSM entities anymore. Spawn entities runs through this vector of nodes that are each of the spawn points. If it is an enemy spawn point, then we make one of the 2 entities using my entity builder. If it is an object, then we make one of the 7 object entities, which is just the different furniture, and then we just give it a random orientation. And if it is a treasure, then we make the treasure chest. This is just to give some pseudo randomness. So there's always going to be furniture in certain spots, but what kind of furniture and its orientation changes. So the load TSV grid is almost the exact same, with some slight changes in that what did I change? Right, I added the enemy object and treasure. So basically go through, make nodes in each graph at that position, including the non-traversable nodes. And anywhere that it's a door, you make the floor using my other builder for the dungeon meshes. Sorry, I need to pause for 1 second. Cool, awesome. Just heard back, and everything that I'm doing, except for possibly the lights, actually, I didn't even do anything different with the lights. I just made sure I didn't have over 100 lights. It's gonna be good. Oh my god. Oh, nothing's going right today. I'm so glad to hear back from Mr. Feeney. this should probably not be part of the video, but it's going to be part of the video. Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my life of chaos and panic and nothing ever working the way I want it to. That is a huge relief, though. All right, let's finish this up so I can upload it to YouTube. 10 minutes, and I'm expecting this to be about an hour. Ugh, don't want it to be that long, though. Anyways, Dungeon Mesh Builder, I'll go over in a bit. Some of them, it just makes the default stuff, and then you set the position and orientation. Excuse me. Add it as a child to the floor mesh, and then push it back. And create a node at each one. Basically, you have to create a node at everything, blah, 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 for the graph. Then I'll go through the graph and create... Is this still... Oh, this is still the grid. Then go through the graph and figure out what edges it can actually make. So basically, I made nodes wherever there are walls, and it still makes an edge there, but it sets the weight of that edge to a super gross amount, so it should never get used in any pathing algorithm. And I also have a Boolean flag on each of those nodes called isOccupied, and I basically set all the wall nodes to isOccupied, and basically when any of the entities move, it checks that is occupied, and it also checks that it's not a wall. And if both of those are false, then it can move into that position. So yeah, go through, make all the horizontal and vertical edges, then go through and find all the diagonal edges. But you can't make diagonals across walls, but you can across objects. Then I run that spawn entities, and then I'll show this off later. But I basically have debug meshes where all the nodes are, and I make debug meshes for all the edges, and then I also add the footprints on each node to the all entities. Draw scene 1. Yeah, I was having some weird things. I used Draw Scene 1 for the bloom effect, but for whatever reason, well, I think I know why. I think I know why, but I don't know why. This Draw Scene 1 doesn't draw any of the... At least it's not supposed to draw any of the entities. Yeah, I had it. Now it doesn't. Finite state machine entities. I really need to take all that stuff out. Light balls, if there are any. All the other meshes. It draws all these, but the bloom still affects the player and enemies and furniture, despite none of that being drawn when I'm doing the bloom stuff. So that was fun. I think I'm just using the wrong texture. I'm not using the texture that I set when I draw all this stuff, but the bloom effect still works, and it works the way I want it to, other than that. So left it in. Then draw scene with distance limit. This is for the off-screen Fbos in the observation room. Basically, if there's like only draw things that are within 20 units, all the entities of the view position that gets entered. I wanted it to do the stencil, but it doesn't seem to do the stencil on the Fbos, which was unfortunate. That I don't know why it doesn't work, but I left it in case it somehow magically starts working. Right? Draw all the entities that are within 20. Then draw all the entities with the distance that are, or that use the stencil that are within 20 units. So like if the stencil is on and anyways, not 100% certain why it doesn't draw the stencil on the Fbos. But it basically just goes through and draws everything else. That's within 20 units. And then giant commented out thing. Giant commented out thing that I'm not using anymore. Cool. Alright, that's all that. Did I change anything in draw? Not since the last graphics project. When I added the second set of texture ratios, 4:7. Cool, that's all the same. Texture manager's all the same. Shader, I will go over the shaders later. Particle physics. This is just the basic particle physics stuff that we did in Physics 1. I didn't need all of it. I just copied it all in to make sure that it worked. I didn't want to copy the world and particle and then world not work because it needed contact and contact resolver. So I just have everything. But in particular is this fire particle that I made. Basically, on all the torch entities, whenever the attenuation changes, if the player is within 20 or 30 units, it launches fire particles. Basically, it is a normal particle that has a mesh on it that starts as pure red and increases its amount of green over time until it dies, so that it is yellow by the end. And then it disappears, then it dies and it gets deleted and disappears from the world. Mediator has just been floating around forever. Haven't actually changed it. I'll go over controls when I actually when I'm playing the game. Graph searches. I read the first search. Look for player within closed area. Basically, it searches all of the neighboring nodes that are not door nodes, and if any of those nodes is occupied and it's occupied by the player, then that's the node that we want the enemy to search for. The only other change I made is A star looks for is exit now. There's a lot of stuff on my nodes that aren't used anymore or used differently. So my nodes, I changed the type to string. I think I changed that a while ago. changed the ID from char to unsigned int, and added is occupied, occupied by, and a pointer to the footprints, so that when entities move around, they have a pointer directly to the footprint entity to tell it what to do. Otherwise, create node, just added that stuff to it. A lot more global variables and stuff. Otherwise, no change. The finite state machine, I don't use any of this anymore. I made slight changes to all of it. Which I guess I should explain. So the way that I had my finite state machine system working before was the system update would pass in the delta time, the vec3 of the current position, and it would return the vec3 of the new position. This was for the AI project of resource gatherer entities, and basically we loaded these bitmaps. Green squares on the bitmaps were spawn points, red squares were resources, yellow squares were difficult terrain, and the blue square was the home base. That's why my graph and node is set up the way it is, because the entities would basically move from node to node depending on the state it was in. But the way that I figured out, or the way that I decided to handle it for that project, was I would pass in the entity's current position, and then the state itself would move the entity and go from there. So the search state would use Dijkstra's also, this was just a huge mess. I wasn't keeping track of the current node or anything like that, so every time something would change, I'd have to look for the node. So that was a big change that I had to make. But basically, for that project, we would use Dijkstra's to look for the target node, and then I would reverse the path from the goal to the root, so that I had the path from root to goal. And then in search, I would go through this path to target until the size was 0, and I would get the direction from the current node to the next node, and then the entity would move in that direction until it reached less than 0.1 distance, and then that was considered arrived until the path to the target was empty. As you can probably already see, this was not very efficient, and for what I was doing, really not good. So most of the new states that I made are fairly self-explanatory and fairly simple. And just in case there were any with the same name, the new ones I started with an S for state. But basically, the main change that I changed is, rather than the states themselves controlling the movement of the entity, instead of returning a vec3, it returns a string message. I basically took the idea of the mediator without using a mediator. Excuse me. So basically, the update now passes in the delta time, the current node, the direction that the entity is looking at, which is a combination of look direction and the int direction. Otherwise, the system didn't change. But what did change, what's a good one? Exit maze state. So the exit maze state is the player cheat state. Basically, the finite state machine system on the player doesn't even turn on until you hit the K button. And when it turns on, it goes into idle. Idle immediately moves into the next state, which is the case for all three entities, the two enemies and the player. So basically, for every state, the enter, the ones that actually do some kind of search, reset the graph, use whatever search algorithm to find the target node. So the exit node I just saved as a global when making the graph. Current node is passed in, and graph is also just global. So we use a star with this stuff, and as long as the target node isn't null, then we put everything onto the path to the target, and then we reverse the order and reset all of our variables. And on exit, just in case it's not empty, I just go through an empty list. So basically, the way that the states handle movement now is they're all on timers, and basically they have a time to next action. Most of them are 0.5, some of them are 1 second. Once the time to next action has passed, then we actually do whatever movement we're going to do. So for this, we check that the path to size is greater than 0. If the next node is occupied, I have to reset and recalculate it. So I just use exit and enter. And if the path to target is 0, then I just say leave the state and return the message end cheating, because there's no possible path, or we've already reached the end. If the size isn't 0, then I return path recalculated. Otherwise, I reset the time to next action, and I check if we're looking in the right direction for the current node, which would be current node position plus look direction to the target position is less than 0.75. If it's the right direction, then I reset the direction to rotate, erase the node from the path, and I tell the player to move. Otherwise, we have to rotate. So if the direction to rotate is 0, I have to figure out which direction I want to rotate in. So the direction that I want is either going to be north, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, or northwest. So I just do these quick calculations and figure out, okay, if the direction I want is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 7, which are just based off of north, northeast, east. Those. I have an enum on the player for those. No, on my entity for those. I then say, okay, my current direction is direction, and I keep track of the number of rotations right and left, and I say, okay, let's rotate left, or let's rotate right first. So I subtract from the current direction, and if the current direction is less than 0, then we set it to 7 until I hit the direction that I want. Then I reset the current direction, and I go and I rotate left, and I basically say, okay, if the number of right rotations is less than the number of left rotations, then the direction I want to rotate is negative. Otherwise, it's positive. And then, so this only runs if the direction to rotate is 0. Otherwise, the direction to rotate is either 1 or it's negative 1. And we return that message. And if somehow it's not, I say, I don't know. And then this else, if the path is empty, then we should be at the exit. So we say current condition 1 and cheating. Otherwise, the timer isn't done, so we just return nothing. I'm not going to go through every single state, but they basically all do that. Enclosed wander and wander basically use the same logic to decide what kind of message to return to their respective entities. And then approach just has the entity approach the player, and then attack has the entity attack the player. So might as well go over the player first. Player has a lot on it. Here's the player, move, rotate, start cheating, its position, look at, and Boolean. Oh, right, I should talk about iEntity, which is the base interface class that everything else inherits from. So on this, I have GLM, comment, and mesh, and I have these static constants for each of these vectors, which are the direction that you have to move to go from one node to another. And then in iEntity, I have an enum class. I was having issues with it, which is why I did this weird int thing. I don't think I need to, but I'm not changing it. I already made one change that I have to push again. Also, hooray for me, first project that wasn't required that I actually used GitHub. It was very useful. But basically, on iEntity, define the directions north through northwest, which is where those rotation directions came from on the state. An entity type player, enemy listen, enemy wander, treasure object, torch, or footprints. Virtual void update. And this is all public. Every entity will have a type, a mesh, and a low resolution mesh. So on the player, I didn't need the mesh anymore, but I have position, look at, and cheating as public, and private direction, current node, its system, and I added footstep sound effects. So I keep track of the sound index here. I basically go 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2 through the sounds rather than 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. I thought it sounded better this way. Anyways, if you ever call, I should just have this deleted, but I have safety. I'll just have it. But player entity, pass in the start position, pass in the look at, and pass in the start node. The node is the most important part. But basically, I was going to use the Dalek for the player. Then I found the Hollow Knight mesh and I went, this is a lot cooler. That'll be the player. So set the mesh, uniform scale 0.4. Don't like true. Don't like true. Don't like should be false. Why is don't like true? It's also not accurate because it definitely gets lit. You can see just by the bloom effect. Interesting. Wonder if that's actually going to make a difference. I'll find out soon. Clear textures, UV hollow, texture ratio 1. I don't set the texture operator, so it should default to 1. Oh, no. Oh, okay. Sure. Yes, what's your default texture operator? 0. Yeah, that makes sense. 0 is just additive. Use stencil is true. Don't know why I was... Oh, I was just testing the model, so I was setting the object color. That's why this was true, because I was testing the model in color. Huh. Anyway, set the type to player. Set the current node to occupied by this type, which is how I check. 0 is the player, so if it's occupied by 0, then I know it's the player. And make the low resolution mesh, which is just an isosphere of 0.5. This one I don't want to be lit, but I do give it the Hollow Knight thing. Set up the system, set up the transitions, set chain to false, set up the sounds. So in update, only if cheating is turned on, then we update the system, which passes in the required information, get the message and return. If the message is rotate 1, we rotate left. If the message is rotate -1, we rotate right. Either I named my things wrong. Huh. Whatever. It works. I know it works. I definitely thought... Oh, no. No, I'm dumb. Positive is left, negative is right. Right. Correct. That is correct. I am just being silly. 37 minutes. I want to get through all this because there's a lot in the actual game that I still have to show. And end cheating, set cheating to false, and reset the system. And then update the position and update the low res mesh position. Move. If the message is forward, check in the direction that we're facing. First of all, have to find the node. That's it. Go through the list of edges on the current node. If there is a node in the direction that we're facing, which would be less than 0.75 in that direction, and then if that node is not a wall and it's not occupied, then we update our position, update the current node by -1, or set the current node to occupied false, occupied by -1, and then set the current node to the node we're moving to, set it is occupied to true, and set its occupied type by that. Play the footstep sound effect, and then break out of the for loop. Don't go through the rest of these. And if it's backwards, do the exact same logic, but subtracting the look at position. Rotate. If the message it gets is left, we increase. And if the direction is greater than northwest, then we set it to north. Right, we subtract. And if it's less than north, we go to northwest. Sorry about that. And then based on the direction that we move, that we're facing, we update the orientation of the mesh. When start cheating is called, we set cheating to true and we start the system. And when we play footstep sound, we call the fmod system to play the sound at the current sound index at the player's position. Then we unpause it, and then we increase the sound index. If it's greater than or equal to 2, then we set it to 2 and set next sound to -1. And if it's less than or equal to 0, we set the sound index to 0. Yeah, simple, basic logic. for that. The listening enemy is the Ivysaur, Pokemon.ply. That's the high resolution model. Actually use normal map and ambient occlusion map. So I was able to use my DFK model, texture operator 4, to do that stuff in the same way. And make the low resolution mesh just the sphere with the Pokemon diffuse. Basically all the same stuff, but the finite state machine is a bit more complex. Idle state's always first. That just immediately transfers into the first state. The wander state is the enclosed wander, which uses the breadth first search to go through or to listen for the player. And then from the enclosed wander, we can enter the approach state, which uses the breadth first search to find the player within, and then takes that path to the player. And when it is one node away from the player, then it enters the attack state, which just sends a message that the player is being attacked. And then from the attack state, it goes back to the approach state. And the approach state, if the player leaves and the depth first search no longer detects the player, then it returns to the wander state. So exactly the same thing. If it gets rotate 1, it rotates left. If it rotates -1, it rotates right. If it gets move, it moves forward. And if it receives the message attack, then it prints out to the screen, I'm attacking the player. Update the mesh, and then these are exactly the same. I can actually take out backwards since the enemies never move backwards, but I left them for future prosperity sake. And then wander is exactly the same thing, but it's the Dalek, and the finite state machine is just wander state, which just picks one of the edge nodes or one of the neighbors and moves to that node. Real simple stuff, just needed to populate the maze. And then the objects, I made them all entities just so that I can have them in the same vector as the player and enemies for the level of detail stuff. But basically set the entity type to object. Set is occupied and occupied by. Update does nothing. Objects never move. The only thing that is slightly different is the treasure object. If it's active, then it checks every frame. If the node that it is in becomes occupied by the player, then it disables the meshes and sets active to false and tells the player you found some treasure. I'll just go over the builders real quick. TLDR, it receives which type of mesh to build, and then it builds it. So if it's a door, there's a door and a door frame. Right. There's the wall, the door frame, and then the door itself that all go into making a door mesh. The floor is just the floor. Portcullis and secret door are just different doors. Stairs are stairs, wall are wall. The light fixture is the torch holder, then the torch, and then the imposter engine exhaust. And the entity builder was just a builder to quickly make each of the furniture and enemy types. I don't use this for the player. So main is where a lot of stuff happens. I don't think I need any of these, but I'm not going to risk everything breaking by taking them out. Basically all the usual stuff, and then after the usual GLFW stuff, I initialize fmod. Usual stuff. Shaders, right? I still have to go over the shaders. I went through and I mapped all the uniforms in the shader proc, so I can just call this instead of this every single time. As I mentioned before, I ended up not having over 100 lights. After reading Mr. Feeney's email, makes a lot of sense to not pass in every single light, only the closest ones. That would have made a lot more sense to do, but instead I just don't have over 100 lights. Anyways, load the lights file, set up all the uniform locations for the lights, load all the files using load game jam models. After loading everything in, we read the TSV grid, then we load the world file. Then I make my quads for the screens and in the observation room, pushing them back onto the vector of meshes. Then I set up all the textures and the default skybox, make the skybox sphere. Oh, I guess I'm gonna have another push. Anyways, figured out I was not doing this right at all. Basically, I was doing something dumb of looking at the camera eye and trying to figure out the yaw from that. I just needed to look at the camera target and set the yaw depending on what the camera target was. Sure, I could do something more precise, but I am never going to have my camera target not be along one of the axes. So this works for what I do. Also, you can change the camera look at in the world file now. Added that to my load world file. Set up the FBOs. Set up the camera stuff. For the flickering and offsets and stuff like that. This is all from graphics midterm. Do the FBO for the player, follower. Set up the FBO for the camera 3, which just follows one of the enemies. And then FBO. I think this is supposed to say camera 4, but over camera 4 screen 2. Which again just picks one of the. No, that definitely said cam 3 angle. Did I switch these? Oh yeah, I was having a weird bug where the textures weren't being set, so I was trying to reorder them to see if that would do anything. It did not. Anyways, after doing all that, we do the bloom, texture, shader stuff. And then still bloom. Setting it all up. I'll go over the actual bloom calculations later. This is just passing in information and saying, hey, set this stuff up, please. FBO. And then here's the main FBO. Clear the buffer. Draw everything like normal. Did I see stencil? Set the don't update the stencil mask while drawing floor and walls and everything else. Then draw the skybox, alpha transparency, which I'll go over later. Physics. If the particle is not alive anymore, remove the particle and erase it from the vector, which essentially deletes the particle. Otherwise, draw it from the mesh, and then draw the stencil. So if the stencil is on, we set up the stencil mask stuff, draw all the entities, then set up the stencil function stuff, draw all the entities again, but this time increasing the scale and setting the stencil color, and then passing that information in and drawing the stencil mesh. Again, still not using FSM entities. Really should take all that out. If the draw light balls is on, draw a light ball. Draw the debug light balls. So if we're not in observation mode, this needs to be much smaller. If we are in observation mode, draw all the nodes of the graph. Otherwise, only the ones that are 30 units or closer. Then go through all the meshes and draw them. Discard for the ones that have discard. Then I do footprint. Then I do specifically the footprint stuff. Alpha transparency is a fun thing. So basically, I had to draw everything. I had to draw all the footprints. Draw all the floors. So I set up a separate mesh vector just for the floor meshes. And yeah, because if I didn't redraw the floors, as the alpha transparency of the footprints went down, you could see the skybox through the floor. So that didn't work. And then FBO stuff for full screen quad. Right, and I was trying all this stuff here, but it wasn't working, so I'm just going to do this. I figured, why not draw the scene and then do the bloom? Didn't want to work, so we're not doing that. 2D effect operators, draw it, and then after all the graphic stuff, update the audio. Listener position is camera. Fun bug with F mode. If the cam forward has anything other than 0 in the Y position for cam forward, it breaks. Basically, I think the issue is that the cam forward and cam up need to actually be orthogonal to each other. And when I was not using this, it was not happy with that. So I forgot about that. So this is the way it works. This is the way it works. Let's call back init F mode. Yeah, that's all basic stuff. Okay, shaders. Oh, excuse me. I am so sorry about that. Vertex Shader. I thought there was something weird about my normal mapping. And I was right. I never converted any of it to tangential space. Issue. Converting it to tangential space kind of broke the whole dang thing. So we don't do that. It's all set up to do that, but I don't do that. Geometry shader, just passing in that information. But again, basically, I tried so many different things. I tried just passing in the TVN, and figuring it out in the fragment shader. I tried figuring out the tangent positions in the Vertex Shader. Same issue. And basically, the only thing that I wasn't doing was the light to vertex needed to be converted. Maybe that's why it wasn't working. Just had a thought. Anyways, I tried it. It was a glitchy mess. Not doing it. Normal mapping is good enough. Has been good enough since I first implemented it here in like November. But what I did add is a bunch of bloom stuff. And other stuff. Anyways, if we're blooming, we do the UV lookup, and we did I not put the link? Oh, there's the link. Yeah, I just followed the tutorial to the best of my ability. But the way I'm doing it, I'm not using a ping pong buffer. I was really just using one buffer. I also wasn't using multiple shaders, which may explain some of the bugginess around my bloom. Anyways, basically calculate the texture for the bloom brightness, pass this all through and return. And then this gets stored in the... No. Calc bloom brightness is first. Which takes the texture light pass color buffer. That's why everything's on it. It's not... Doesn't care about what I'm drawing to that buffer. But when I was using the other one, it wasn't working. So yeah, use the scene buffer. I'm doing so much unnecessary stuff in my main. Oh well. Use the scene buffer. If the brightness is, or if the dot product of the brightness with this was just the vector 3 that they used. I don't 100% know why they used it. They didn't actually explain the choice of that number. But the dot product with that is less than 0.95. Then I set the pixel to 0. And then set all this stuff up like normal. Then we go into here. And so when I do this, this texture gets saved into text bloom brightness, which then blurs. This is the blur. This is the blur. This blurs it and updates the texture to text to light pass color buffer, which we will see later. So now we're in the 3D effect pass. This is all normal. This is all stuff I did for other stuff. Texture operator 8, 9, 10. 10 was garbage. It does nothing. This is the new part. If bloom is true, the bloom color is the texture UV lookup of that. And if use bloom is true, then I add that bloom color to it and then return. If we're in the lighting pass, nothing changes. Texture operator 4. No, I remember what changed. I realized that because of the way we do this, the DFK text models weren't actually using their normal maps for light calculations. So, oh, this is something else that I changed. Not this, but because imposter changes it. The only imposter thing I do is the flame thing. So I just changed the blue to red and discard the black parts of it. And if discard transparency is on, I grab the discard sample, and if the texture operator is 1, then I set the discard sample to 0.99, and if it's 2, it's 0.7. I forget which one's which, but 1 is for the footprints, dinosaur footprints, and 1's for the treads. And then this was old stuff. Vertex, use all. Yeah, this. Never actually used the normal map because texture operator 4 isn't set to 4 when drawing the full screen quad, so it was never actually calculating the light for the DFK models using their normal maps. So I re-added the calculate light contrib here. 5, 6, and aren't being used. 10 I didn't use. 11 is that Metroid screen. That just, it switches between the 3. If the flicker offset is set, it flickers, and if the static is on, then it adds the static texture. 12 is the first FBO, and 13 is the second FBO, like I used to do. But 14 is the one that follows the player. I wanted to combine the static and offset as well as the FBO texture, so mostly just a try. I find it very annoying to look at or try to use to control the player, but it works. It does exactly as I expected it to. And if texture operator is 20, that's when we just set the vertex color to the stencil color. Otherwise, nothing else here got changed. Alright, I got a lot of buttons to go over, and it's already been an hour. This is going to be fun to upload to YouTube. I like spending 2 hours trying to record a video for OBS to keep crapping out on me. So now I really hope this hour-long one worked. If this hour-long one didn't work, I am not going into nearly as much detail if I have to re-record it. Also, I need a new computer. This one is starting to die on me. Oh, it's redoing. Okay, I'm gonna pause the recording until it's done compiling. I added a distribution stuff, so it's trying to copy all the distribution stuff and zip it up. So I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. For the purposes of this demo, I'm not going to go full screen, but I should. How big can I make it and still see everything I want to? That big. If you resize the window, press P and it will reset the FBO resolutions. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. Still do the 2D effect operators as before. 0 resets them. In observation mode, WASD, Q, and E control the camera. Mouse aims the camera. Oh boy, a lot of stuff to go over. So first things first. In observation mode, any object or any entity that is over 20 units away gets drawn with their low resolution mesh. If you press L, it changes that to draw all of them with their high resolution mesh regardless of distance. Slows things down a little bit, not too bad. Pressing Z on your keyboard will draw the debug spheres for light positions. And as I mentioned in the short demo, lights are only active if they are within a certain range of the camera. So when I get close enough to a light, it turns on, and you can see a little wireframe debug sphere. That is where the point light actually is. And you can see the flickering as well as from the torch mesh that it is flickering. And you can see the little fire particles being emitted from the torch. Doesn't look super great when you're above or behind. I do not sort the torches, so they get drawn after all the walls and floors. So when you're above them, you can see where parts of them are getting discarded and discarding the floors and walls behind them. However, I got around this because when you're in first person or overhead mode, you can't tell. You're looking up at the skybox. And the particle effects actually look pretty good. So I'm going to press Z again, turn all the lights off, and I'm going to go run back to the observation room, or at least farther away. And if you press X, it turns all the lights on. They no longer care about distance. Which isn't a huge deal until you combine it with bloom. The video is a little bit laggier than my computer. It's actually running pretty smoothly still. But I can tell on OBS that it's stuttering a little bit. So pressing X again turns them on and off. This is going to be the one that really slows things down. When you press C, it draws the entire graph. Every single node in the graph is being drawn. And then the lines between nodes are the edges. You will notice that some of them have short white lines that don't fully connect. Those are the edges that connect to wall nodes. As I mentioned before, I made nodes where all the walls are. The reason for that was because I was changing how I wanted to do making the edges. In particular, I didn't want to be able to travel diagonally through the wall. So initially, if I was in this node right here, not the pink one, the green one here, and I wanted to go to that door, I could cut through the corner and go diagonally. That was before I was making nodes where all the edges were, or where all the walls are. Basically, what I do is, because I have all the nodes, I do the horizontal and vertical first, and I still make an edge with the wall node, but I make that weight super ridiculously high, so any search algorithm will never use that node. But effectively, what that let me do then, when I do the diagonal nodes, I check the edges of and find what nodes are horizontal or vertical, and if those nodes are wall nodes, then we don't make a diagonal node there. The other thing that I added later is the furniture. So it may look like there's a missing edge here, but in actuality, this is a bit of back and forth. I did the graph first, then I did the entities, and then I went back to the graph. So I did the graph, then I went to the entities, and I was like, okay, well, I have checks for walls and stuff, but I need checks for other entities. So then I added that is occupied flag. So what happens is the graph still makes all of its edges and everything, but then wherever there's a object or furniture, that node gets marked as is occupied. So it still makes the edges, and I still want to be able to travel diagonally across those is occupied furniture objects. But so right now the Venusaur is actually trying to move into that node, but in the movement logic itself, there is a flag that says, hey, if that next node is occupied, you can't move there. So that's why there's still edges there, but you can't move into them. All right, so that's the graph. V is the stencil. It doesn't look super nice, depending on the angle you're at. It's just drawing the model slightly bigger rather than outlining. The OpenGL tutorial I followed was using boxes, and boxes don't have hollow spaces underneath them. So when you're in observation mode and when you're in first person mode, it doesn't look the best, but what it does look good for is the overhead mode directly above all of the objects. It makes this nice outline from above. So I decided, you know what, overhead stencil, good enough for rock and roll. It looks pretty good from ahead. And depending on the model, it doesn't even look bad. In first person, it's just a little awkward in some places. It's not an actual outline like when I do that's edge detection. Like this edge detection is like actually detecting edges. Whereas the stencil is just drawing the same model slightly larger and then basically discarding any pixels that are already occupied by the original model. So that's B is debug normals. That's old. N. Oh, N is gloom or bloom. I didn't want to mention this in the short demo. It doesn't look super good when you're in observation mode, because you move the camera around so fast, the delay is super obvious. But when you're in first person or overhead mode, the speed at which you can move the player, the bloom actually looks very nice. It's just this bright effect wherever there's torches. And it doesn't even go that far. Like the Venusaur doesn't have any bloom, or has a little bloom on it because of the eyes and teeth. I don't want to get attacked. Is this my room? Oh yeah, this is my room. And in one of my takes that I had to scrap because OBS froze on me, the Dalek interrupted me, but it was a dark blue Dalek. So there was just this nice bloom effect on the dome of it as it wandered around and kept getting in front of me when I was trying to show it off. M is the usual, change everything to wireframe. L is level of detail. Oh, apparently I had level of detail on. Lovely. P is the resize. Does O do anything? No. As I mentioned briefly, keypad 1, 2, 3, 4 control entity speed. So pressing 4 is 10 times speed. I'm just waiting for the Dalek to get out of the way. And I'm going to come here. The Ivysaur detects me within range. It's going to turn towards me and see me. And it's going to start attacking. I can move. And it'll realize, oh, it's not in front of me anymore. I'm gonna go move and track it and target it again. I was having a weird bug where I would purposefully get in the Ivysaur's way. I still can't believe that's in the wrong spot, and I still refuse to fix it. I would purposefully. So let's say the Ivysaur was all the way left, and I was perfectly in line with it. The path it would want to take is directly towards me. So I would wait until it started moving, and then I would run up to it, basically interrupt it and occupy the next space I wanted to move into, and it would crash the game. Just the whole application would freeze up because the entity didn't know what to do. I think I fixed it. I think I was just missing a return statement, but I've since added the return statement. And since doing that, it hasn't done that to me yet. So I'm going to wait for it to move 1. Actually, it's just going to attack me there. Yeah. So I need it to move towards me. And then I run up and I interrupt it. Yeah, it doesn't crash anymore. It recalculates its path and then realizes, oh, it's right in front of me anyways. I'll just attack it. And of course you can play everything at a faster speed. And I think that's about everything I wanted to go over. The off-screen Fbos, just I have a list of all the enemy entities. So the 2 on the side, just they pick a random index and then watch it, and every few seconds it changes. Then the player one only ever watches the player, but it has the added flickering and occasional offset, which is sometimes sickening to try and control the player through. And then this right one, I literally just copied the FBO that I had in the Graphics 2 midterm. Just has the offset and the static effect, because, you know, future space stuff can never work perfectly. I think that is about it. Thank you for watching. I had a blast this last year. GDP was such a good experience for me. Before I enrolled in GDP, I was not very confident. I didn't feel like I was qualified for any video game design job postings or anything like that. I had a hard time even like being motivated to try to apply when it felt like I wasn't qualified for anything. But over the last year, I've learned to actually use my knowledge. I've done things, I've programmed things that I had only ever heard of or thought of in theory, and I feel good. I'm confident. I'm ready to work. I want to work. As soon as this is all submitted and everything's done and handed in, applications are going out the door by the drove. So thank you to all my professors. Thank you to anyone watching this for watching. I hope you enjoyed. In the YouTube description, I am going to have a link to the itch.io where this game jam is being hosted. And if you're seeing this through the itch.io, there should be links to the YouTube videos. So thank you everybody for watching. Have a good day. Bye.